Welcome back to College Football Addiction. I've got Gabby Uridia on from Canes 247 inside the U. Appreciate you, Gabby, for hanging out. How you doing, bud?
I'm doing well, TJ. Glad to be back on again, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Before we get to the Duke game, this last week, and maybe it's just because the result was never really in question, but you know, I can, and again, even coming at it from the Florida State perspective, it felt like the most boring rivalry game like that I've ever. Is that? I mean, when you're on the winning side, maybe it feels less boring. But even
No,
like
no, it felt boring.
it was bad. Like even okay, so 2 years ago in 2022, to me that game was at least like there were long touchdowns and
Right.
Trey Benson had a bunch of broken tackles on it. It's like and of course you're on the winning side, so it's of course you're going to think it's a little more exciting, but even that one felt more exciting, and the game was never really in doubt. And so maybe but it was boring. It wasn't even fun.
No, I'm with you. I feel like the whole week was kind of boring. Like I felt like it was just a really kind of juiceless rivalry week, which
Yeah.
is a little disappointing. I mean, it is what it is, and yeah, I think the game itself, again, I think Miami typically averages like 12 possessions a game. I think they got 8. They had to kind of settle for field goals, so we weren't seeing a lot of those like really exciting. Cam Ward obviously wasn't, the Cam Ward that we'd kind of seen. So yeah, it was kind of a boring game. Had some big runs and popped some runs, but it definitely wasn't, the exciting, fun Miami that we had kind of seen to this point of the season. So, again, from this perspective, obviously nice to get a win, and I think it was good for the program. But I do think that it didn't feel like a regular Florida State Miami game.
Yeah, I had a buddy that asked like, "Oh, should I go? Should I not?" And I was like, "Well, best case, something crazy happens and FSU wins, and then like worst case, you go see like a Heisman quarterback probably go for like 1 billion yards and a
Right,
bunch of crazy plays, and neither of those things happened." So,
right, it's true.
yeah, it was just like Miami felt. I feel like just hey, we're gonna do what we need to do and get out with the win. But even just settling for the field goals, you're like, man, this is go for it on fourth down. Like, give us some
Something,
excitement here,
something.
like give us some juice. So, um, maybe some juice in a different way this week. That's a good segue. With Manny coming back, just thoughts around like, he seems like he's in a fine place now, and
Yeah.
whatever, like has somewhat moved on, but he's got to get up for it a little bit more. And then there's players on this roster, not a ton, right? But like, there's got to be a couple, right, that are maybe holdovers, or are there any still from
Definitely.
when he was there? But just thoughts on that kind of bigger story being part of this game as opposed to just the actual football game.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting storyline. Manny Diaz coming back to coach at Miami. Look, I mean, I don't personally have any like animosity or anything negative to really say about him. Like, I think he did the best he could. I think he was kind of thrust into a position that maybe he wasn't quite maybe ready for professionally. And I think now he's in a better place where he's in a situation that's probably better for who he is and what he's trying to do. Like, I think that's a good solid Duke situation that he's in, and he's got them already bowl eligible, and hoping to do a little bit more here, with this team. I think it's going to be interesting, of course, and there are a few holdovers. Xavier Restrepo is probably the most notable. Jacoby George is another one that is definitely a holdover. I'm trying to think about if there's really anyone else. Jalen Rivers, so Miami's starting left tackle, is someone that was here when Manny was here. But again, I think it's an exciting game. Again, I think both programs are in very different play. Both people, programs, everything are in totally different situations now. So I think the storyline of Manny coming back is cool. Rooting for him, hope that he does well at Duke, and again, Manny's a good dude. He's a good dude. Has a good, nice, aggressive defense. So I'm looking forward to the game this weekend.
Duke has been rather aggressive. They've got 9 takeaways over their last 2 games, and Miami seems like they've cleaned that up a little bit over the last couple of games. That certainly went through a stretch with VT and Cal where they were a little bit higher, but Duke with 9 takeaways over the last 2 games, is that somewhat concerning, or is that just kind of a all right? We really need to kind of lock in and not let this creep back up because they've certainly been opportunistic the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I think that that's who Manny Diaz kind of is, right? Like, I think that this is the identity of those Manny Diaz defenses. When Manny was at his best here at Miami, that 2017 season, the first season of the turnover chain, Miami led the nation in turnovers, generating turnovers, tackles for loss, sacks. He definitely runs a very, very aggressive system that, kind of takes those shots at creating turnovers. That definitely is, aggressive in those types of ways. So yeah, I mean, I think as Miami's been an offense that at times have been kind of turnover prone. Cam Ward in his past, he hasn't really proven that this year. The issues with maybe fumbles or things like that. So I think it's definitely something you need to kind of, be weary of, something that you need to kind of focus on. But I also at the same time think that Miami is kind of a unique test for Duke. Like, I don't think that they've seen a front, especially like maybe an offensive front that, to the level that maybe Miami has, and just personnel wise. So I am curious how this, how it kind of goes for Duke defensively, just given all the different ways that Miami can kind of get you and beat you, and how I think they can find ways to kind of limit that aggressiveness and, those turnover prone plays.
Yeah, it was interesting, because we talked about a second ago, like Ward was fine. Like he didn't have a bad game or anything. He just didn't have like the electric Heisman type game that,
Right.
we had seen the first 7 times he'd been out this year. And so you kind of do think like, well, um, does that provide other opportunity, other teams, like kind of the game plan on slowing him down? But I guess the counter to that is, well, then you better get ready to be run over for about 200 yards on the ground. If that's what you want to do, and you want to play back, and you want to say like, well, we're not going to get beat deep. We're not, you're not. And I think Florida State's secondary did play really well. I think it was
Yeah.
probably the best secondary that Miami has seen so far. I wouldn't even question that. I think it's the best secondary Miami's seen so far, and they played really well. So that's not to take anything away from them, but it's kind of pick your poison at this point. Like, all right, you want to drop a bunch of guys back and try and limit the passing game, then we will run you to death.
Yeah, and again, I think that that's kind of been the issue that Miami's kind of run into all season. And yeah, credit to Florida State. Like, when you have, like, Florida State has legit, like, kind of man cover corners, and I think Miami had similar struggles against Virginia Tech. Obviously, not as much, but teams with good cornerbacks. Yeah, I think Virginia Tech has two really good corners in Dorian Strong and Mansour Delane. I think it's similar. It's similar issues that Miami kind of runs into when you kind of get corners that can kind of really man up against Miami's outside wide receivers. And then Florida State did a good job of bracketing Xavier Restrepo. That might be like the game plan, but you also have to have the personnel to do it. And I'm not quite sure if Duke has those true like man cover corners, like Az Thomas. I thought was awesome. Fentrell Cypress I thought was awesome on the outside as far as just playing man coverage and making it difficult for Miami's wide receivers to create separation. Which again, I think that has quietly been an issue that they've sort of struggled with. A lot of the, they've beaten man coverage at times, but that's definitely a way to kind of slow down Miami, is by kind of play like really locking down in man coverage. So yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see what Duke kind of comes out with. Again, Miami has shown that they have that kind of pick your poison offense. Like, if you're going to take away the pass, Miami has 3, 4 really good running backs that they can kind of throw at you all game, and they're a load to bring down. Damian Martinez is kind of getting rolling now. It seems like he's playing his best football, since he's gotten to Miami after being, an all Pac 12 running back at Oregon State. Mark Fletcher is a big body too, table as well. So he has sort of that pick your poison offense. And, if Cam Ward doesn't have his sharpest game, that doesn't debilitate Miami and what they're able to do offensively, because again, they have the personnel to attack so many different ways. So yeah, maybe that is how teams start playing Miami. It's like, hey, we can live with that, with limiting their possessions and forcing them to drive down the field by making them run the ball. But again, I think if you can't cover Miami's receivers, then it'll just be a long day for you. So I am curious to see how Miami kind of stacks up with this Duke defense.
Yeah, they're so diverse offensively that they can just do so many different things. If they didn't have the stable, if obviously if they didn't have Ward, like there's just so many, and then really good receivers that make it really tough to guard them. The other side of the ball, Malik Murphy had his best game
Yeah.
of the year last week, and I thought he had really struggled, like, and just not been super impressive, and they were kind of winning in spite of him. And last week he was really really good, and their offense has been pretty boomer bust. In fact, they had 6 turnovers against. They took 6 turnovers from SMU, and they scored 7 points after the 6 turnovers. One of those was like a 60+ yard drive, so I don't know if that's really points off turnovers or not, but they really didn't convert any of their
Yep.
opportunities. And Malik, though, still had a pretty good game. And when you look at Miami's secondary, it's hard for me to extrapolate much from Miami's secondary last week against Florida State. Again, no shots there at my own team, but I don't know how you're playing a pretty bad group of wide receivers and then two
Right.
pretty inexperienced freshmen and a pretty bad offensive line. So it's hard to, I think Miami's defense played well for the game, but it's also like,
For
I'm
sure.
not giving you too much credit for that one because I know how bad that offense is. But just thoughts on that secondary matching up with Malik Murphy, who's maybe rounding into form.
Yeah, I mean Malik Murphy, he has a really big arm. I was just right before we jumped on, I'm watching that SMU Duke game, and I think it's clear that he has a ton of arm talent. He can definitely drive the ball downfield. He's a talented kid, right? He was a highly ranked kid who signed with Texas, got a few opportunities, with the Longhorns before transferring to Duke this offseason. Yeah, I mean he's talented, and if he gets rolling, he definitely has a couple receivers that he can get to. That slot fade he threw for as for Duke's first touchdown was a really impressive ball as far as just like the amount of juice he put on it plus the touch to kind of drop it in there. So I think Malik Murphy's I think that Duke offense has a chance to kind of test Miami's defense, which has really, again, to your point, TJ, the outside of this Florida State game recently has not been good. I think prior to the Florida State game they were allowing 38 points per game or defensively with some special teams turnover stuff kind of mixed in there, but it has not been good. So I definitely think that this is going to be another test for this Miami secondary. But I also think an opportunity to respond, like similar to the Florida State thing. Duke's been sort of anemic at times on offense, and so again, I think that this could be another game where it's an opportunity for Miami secondary to kind of bounce back and start building that confidence off of the Florida State game. Which again. I'm not definitely not pushing back on any of your points. Like that Florida State offense is not something to start pounding your chest over. Like we had a super sick defensive performance, but I think maybe stacking 2 weeks like that, I think helps kind of put you in position to maybe just kind of regain some of that confidence going into that final stretch of the schedule. So I'm curious to see if this Duke offense it kind of starts getting rolling, if they start picking it up like off that. But yeah, at the same time, you turn the ball over, you gain 6 turnovers, win the turnover margin by 6, you score 21 points in regulation. It's 21 or 24. I'm not sure which one it was, but I mean, regardless, not a lot of points. That doesn't scream super efficient offense or
Yeah.
high potent offense. So again, at the end of the day, teams are gonna have to are gonna have to score with Miami, right? Like Miami's gonna score. Like they're gonna do. They're going to put points on the board. So, I mean, I don't necessarily know if I trust this Duke offense yet to have one of those outlier games where they finally do put up the points that they hadn't really been scoring all year.
Yeah. What do you think? Just last one, and we'll wrap up. What do you think? Just big picture, the pressure of these last few weeks. Now everyone at Miami's in the top five. Everyone expects them to be in Charlotte, and maybe expected them to be competing for Charlotte really all year. But what do you think about like just the way that they'll play with pressure? I wouldn't say any of these last few opponents are somebody that a team that I would pick over Miami, but we do see teams a lot of times when you get into November kind of not crater, but just kind of show some of those
Yeah.
cracks when the pressure really is on them. I actually kind of look at Colorado that same way. Colorado's 6-2. Not a lot of people expected that. They're going to be favored in their last 4 games. How do they play? Like, it's easy to play as like, oh, nobody believes in us.
Right.
So kind of that same angle for Miami. What does that look like?
Yeah, navigating November is the most important thing that you can do in college football as a contender, right? Like Miami hasn't really been in a position to do that. They also haven't done it well in this Mario Cristobal era. So this is definitely uncharted waters. I think this is just one of those situations where you kind of have to bunker down. You kind of have to just kind of keep them just intensely focused on just that week. You can't really look ahead to say, hey, what we want to do is right in front of us. I think you can recognize that while also still kind of just being present. And we have to just kind of take this one week at a time and, take advantage of all these opportunities that we have. I think that that's going to be the biggest question about this Miami team. Can they navigate this? Because, I mean, to your point, TJ, they're going to be favored and probably favored by a wide margin in each of like they're Miami's 20-point favorites in this game over with Duke, on Saturday. They're going to continue to be favorites over Georgia Tech, over Wake Forest, and over Syracuse at the back end of the year. Like they just need to kind of continue to, just play their kind of brand of football and kind of just, kind of dial it back in after some of those breakdowns, in the kind of that middle chunk of the season. I think if Miami just plays B plus football, if even B football, like they should be kind of good for the rest of the season because I think they're just more talented, and I think they're built to sustain, these next 4 games. They're built to win these next 4 games, and again, get to Charlotte and all those things. But yeah, there's no doubt that pressure's mounting. Miami's like on the cusp of accomplishing what they set out to accomplish coming into the year, and something even more special, an undefeated regular season. Going into Charlotte with an opportunity to play for a bye in the college football playoffs. So a lot on the line. But again, I think that 1 week mentality is where Miami's kind of at. That's kind of what they preach on a weekly, borderline daily basis. So I think that this is a team that's just got to bunker down and just kind of just handle business 1 week at a time.
Yeah. Do you? I'm sure you're picking Miami. I don't know if you've done an official prediction just yet,
Yeah.
but the people over at Inside the U may riot if you went the other way. But do you think they cover the spread?
Yeah, maybe.
It's so
I
hard
probably have.
when it's like 20
Yeah, it's
points.
20 points is a lot, man. Like even the Florida State spread, like I was kind of like 21 points is kind of a lot for a rivalry game, and I did pick them to cover against Florida State, but they just barely did. Um, I think I would probably pick them to cover right now, just because I don't think Duke, like I kind of said it earlier, I don't think Duke's seen anything kind of remotely close to what Miami is. SMU is good, but I feel like they're kind of maybe more of a finesse team. Like I don't know if
No.
SMU's particularly a line of scrimmage team. Miami's a line of scrimmage team. Like Miami will beat you up front, especially from that run blocking standpoint, and on the defensive front, they get after it. So I think Miami might be able to overwhelm Duke in the trenches, and then again, if Malik Murphy isn't sharp, like sharp, I think this Duke offense can sputter. So I think Miami scores. I don't know if Duke is going to score a ton. So yeah, I would probably take Miami to cover the 20 at this point, but I don't know. Maybe my opinion will change later in the week.
Yeah, I could. It's so many points that it's hard. You could be up by 24 the whole game and take your foot off, and then they get a
Right,
garbage time. Kind of like last week. You get a garbage time touchdown that
right.
ended screwing you if you put a bunch of money on it. So that's why you just stay away from the big spreads. But Gabby, where can people follow you? Where can they find your work, bud?
Yeah, InsideTheU.com, the Miami site over on the 24/7 Sports Network, on Twitter at GabbyUrudia247. We got everything Miami covered for you.
Awesome. Appreciate you, buddy.
Absolutely, man. Thank you.